Everyone studies for the CCA like it's an eBPF exam, but eBPF is only 10% of it. The weight sits in the three domains: architecture, network policy, and a service mesh. Together, they are 54% of the questions, and eBPF is the mental model those domains are built on. But it's only 6 questions, not the whole test. I'll show you where the points are and actual score at the end of the video. So let's move on. Most Kubernetes networking exams test you on the concepts any CNI can handle: the pod, CIDR allocation, service routing, namespace isolation. CCA is a bit different. Cilium runs eBPF programs directly on a kernel. No OP tables, no kubeproxy required, and because the data plane lives in the kernel, everything builds on top of it. The observability, security, and the service mesh works differently than what you have used to. If you have passed the CCA exam, your networking knowledge will carry you through some of this, but the eBPF fundamentals and Hubble architecture sections don't map cleanly to anything else in the Kubernetes ecosystem. That's where people leave the points on a table. 60 questions, 90 minutes, and the passing score is 75. Multiple choice and online proctored. There are 8 domains and they are not equal. Architecture is 20%, network policy 18%, service mesh 16%. Those 3 are more than a half of the exam. At the bottom, the BGP. At the bottom, the border gateway protocol and the external networking is 6%, and the eBPF definitely. The thing everyone obsessed over, but it's only 10%. So study according to the weights. The mistake is pouring hours in the eBPF internals and BGP, while under-preparing the service mesh, which worth nearly 3 times as much as BGP. Identity versus IP is where a lot of points get lost on the exam. Keep that framing in mind for everything that follows. I would say start with eBPF fundamentals, even if they feel abstract for you. It's only 10% of the questions, but architecture, network policy, and observability all assume you understand that. 3 things you need to know cold. First, the eBPF programs run in a kernel and are verified at the load time. No infinite loops, no invalid memory access. The second thing, eBPF maps are key value stores in the kernel memory, used to share state between programs and user space. Third, Cilium uses a number identity derived from the pod labels, not the IP addresses, to enforce the policy. The wrong answer is always thinking that policy uses the pod's IP, which sounds reasonable until you remember that pod IPs change on every restart, and Cilium's model is built precisely to avoid this dependency. For security, the L7 policy requires the envoy. This is not obvious from the YAML, and a Cilium network policy with HTTP rules looks like normal YAML, but silently depends on envoy being deployed. The exam gives you a scenario and asks why HTTP filtering isn't working, and the answer is that envoy proxy isn't present. One more distinction that shows up: Cilium network policy is namespaced, and Cilium cluster network policy applies across the whole cluster with no namespace. A scenario will hint you which one it needs. Mutual authentication, WireGuard transparent encryption, and IPsec all the fair game. I'm not certain whether the exam goes deep on the WireGuard versus the IPsec comparison or just tests the awareness. I would read both sections in the docs and not gamble on it. For observability, my recommendation would be know the difference between the per node Hubble server built into the Cilium agent and Hubble relay, which aggregates flows cluster-wide. If relay isn't running, Hubble observe only shows flows on the local node. That shows up as a question. On the networking, my tips would be that the kubeproxy replacement question appears consistently on the exam, so you need to be prepared for that. And also, Cilium handles service load balancer in the eBPF. And service lookups go from the ON complexity IP table chains to O1 complexity map lookup. Know what direct server return means and when it applies. One thing that generally surprised me is that the service mesh domain was harder than I expected, and that at 16% it carries real weight. I came thinking that network policy is just a network policy and got hit by the question on transparent encryption mods and certificate-based mutual authentication. That's probably where I lost a few points. The Isovalent free interactive labs at the isovalent.com/labs are the best resource that exists for this exam actually. Real Cilium clusters in a browser. Simulation and actual Cilium with the actual eBPF. I did about 8 hours across those labs during 2 weeks preparation. What worked for me? Finishing every lab and then immediately writing down the key command or the YAML from the memory. Reading lab output doesn't stick the same way. What didn't work for me? Reading the Cilium docs top to bottom. The docs are good, but they cover the entire project and not the exam domains. I spent 2 hours in the BGP section before I realized it's a small part of the networking domain, not worth the depth early. Actually, all the study resources I aggregated on the GitHub repository at Mike Avsam Kubastronaut, and links are below. Speaking of the results, so I got 82 points, first attempt, and the passing score is 75. I agree, it's not a perfect score, but a clear pass with a margin, and I walked out of the exam knowing exactly which questions I got wrong and why. The security domain cost me a few points, and the eBPF and Hubble sections gave me them back. The practice test that I put together covers all 8 domains in the same format as the real exam. That's on the yetmike.com/practice/CCA. I used it for my final review pass. The mental model that made that click for me is that Cilium is not networking software with security bolted on. It's a kernel platform, and networking, observability and security are all the consumers of the same eBPF programs running in the kernel. I also shoot the videos on how I passed all the other multiple choice exams on the path to the Golden Cube Astronaut status. Watch them on the channel, and good luck with the exam.